All right, welcome back to another Touch Designer tutorial. Today we are going to be looking at some materials. We are going to be using some PBRs, some fongs, a little constant to set up our scene, some different LFOs and noise, some different SOP geometries, and expanding that out with a little feedback over the back end of it, also some environment light. So let's jump into it. So like we normally do, we are going to close out this session. We are going to start anew. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to add a base container. We're going to jump right inside of this. And let's start setting up our geometries and our SOPs. So we're going to first add a sphere. We're going to, at the end of that, add an attribute create. We're going to set this attribute create to compute tangents. We are going to put a transform on this. We are going to then add a null. And we're going to start setting up our render network on the back end of this null. So we're going to go into our comp. We're going to add a geometry. We are going to add a light. We are going to add a camera. And we are going to add our render top. The back end of this render top, we're going to put a null way out here. And we are going to add a transform right here just to set our stage here, put the alpha at 1, do comp over background, and then we can turn this on so we can see our sphere in space. So since we're going to be adjusting some different things, I'm also going to create a constant and to set up my resolutions. So the same type of thing we normally do. So res x, res y. And I'm also going to set up two different things for substance. So I'm going to set up a substance x and a substance y. And we're going to set this to 1920, set this to 1080. And I am going to think about this. So if we do 1024, because we're going to have to do powers of 2, I'm just going to set this for the time being. And I'm going to press C on my keyboard, and I'm going to change this to black because I love black. And I'm going to change this to data. And here, we're going to take our first thing here. We're going to view these. Same type of scenario that we always do here is we are going to drag in our resolutions, drag our resolution here, and then we have our sphere in space that is now resolution to 1920 by 1080. Okay, so the thing that we're going to do is, since we're going to kind of set our scene here slightly, is I'm going to create this sphere as in the example, but I'm also going to create these two different planes in the background. So I'm going to take all these and copy and paste this. And I'm going to copy and paste it again. I'm going to delete this sphere. And I'm going to add a rectangle for my geometry down here. Drag this into here. Drag this into here. And you can see the rectangle is actually sitting inside the sphere right now because the sphere is pretty big. And so we're gonna transform some of these dimensions here. So this is where you have to play with numbers a little bit, and we're gonna do 45 on this. And first, let's take our sphere and dial that radius down. So I'm gonna do like 0.02 on this, 0.02, 0.02. So we make it nice and small. It's probably a little too small in there. So let's make it slightly bigger. Let's make it 0.2. And this is kind of, again, setting everything up. So how we adjust in 3D space here. And I'm going to take my camera. I'm going to go down to like 2 on this. So we're bringing it back. And then we're going to, in our sphere here, in our geometry, we are going to actually slide these rectangles back. We're going to change the size of this too. We're going to do 2 by 1. So we're creating kind of that plane. And in this, we are going to take the Z-axis and move that back -1, And this one, we're going to move it back -1. So now we're back in our little space here, right? And let me see, what else did I do? I feel like I just pivoted something wrong. But we will correct that down the road. And in our sphere, we're going to take this one and we're going to actually push this out, let's say 0.5. So it's sitting out a little proud in space. And one thing we can do too is we are going to add another camera so we can kind of see our scene and kind of look at it from, you know, our overall view. And you can see something is slightly off there. So I have to go back in here. Oh, I know why, because I never transformed this one. So we go into here, we do -45. And now we kind of have what we were looking for previously, right? So we'll keep this for now, and we're going to start to add some different things in here. So the biggest thing is when we're using a phong, which we're going to be using on this geometry, but we can kind of set the stage and get some different color in there since we're dealing with materials, and we can put a constant in here, and we can like reference this for our materials for our walls. And I'm going to, in this constant, turn this down to, let's say, a darker gray to keep our background so we're just not blinding ourselves looking at white light. And then I can change this alpha. And one thing you notice is we have this yield sign right here. So it's a good thing to watch out in materials is, in this constant, I can go to this comment tab and do blending transparency, and then it eliminates that. And this is kind of a cool look right here. But this also gives us the ability to know where our shapes are in space and how we can adjust them, because we are going to, again, change some of this in our space, in our geometries right here. So like where we are proud, you know, how we're looking in space like that. So I'm going to take that and go -3 on that one. I'm going to take this one and go +3 on this. Let's see, +3, and there you go. So now we're kind of, again, creating the room. And since we have this, we can do one more thing is, like in the example, I kind of created a floor. So we're going to do this, and we're just going to do this right off the bat. We're going to copy that one more time. And you can see we're using a lot of sops here, and we don't have to, but for this example, I'm just kind of using a demonstration because we're going to do some different materials. And I'm going to take this transform that we have here. I'm going to change this back to 0. And then I'm going to pivot this so we actually have it on the floor, right? So we want to have it slightly on an angle so we can see it. And then we're going to bring this forward in space. And then we're going to, this is one of those things you kind of just have to adjust, or we could know all the numbers and be real smart about it, but I'm just kind of doing it by looking at it slightly. And we're going to start to, again, change these values down. Oops, I hit that one. I have to do the points here and bring that down. So now we have kind of our 4 in space. And let's see, let's move this back a little bit. I'm going to slide this over. So we are kind of covering everything off. So we know that in reality, if we brought these different things, we are covering some ground here per se, right? And then again, how I pivot my rotate, you know, what the length on the floor is, you know, what we're trying to look for, like what pitch on the floor. So again, I'm just kind of adjusting some things here of where I want it to sit. And we're going to leave it right there for now because we can mess with this all day. So we kind of have what we're looking for in terms of setting our scene for our geometry. And now we want to make this sphere and put a phong on it. So I'm going to take a phong. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put a null on the end of this phong in case I want to change that out to something later. And I'm going to put the null onto our geo, which is our sphere. And this could be another time where you just want to label some different things. Like we could do, here is side wall left. outside wall right, and 4. And we're going to say this is going to be our flower per se. Right? And so we kind of do that, and so we have those different things happening. And then in our phong, this is going to be some of the fun, and we're going to start playing with this. So one of the things also is we can take a noise to start to give some like depth and some dimension to our sphere. So I'm going to take a noise. I'm going to put a null at the end of this. And then I'm also going to do a normal. So if you see here, this is when we're getting into materials, and then we have to, start thinking about dimensions, since we've talked about some materials and some different things like that. So I'm going to do this. I have my normal. I'm going to kind of set up my harmonics there to, let's say, 4, just to give it some other depth. And then I'm going to take this and drag it right onto the phong and use this as my color map. And then in this phong, so there's all these different things that we can adjust in here, and all the different types of things. So you can see this normal map, and that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to take this normal map and also put it here. So this is, again, the power of that is now we're creating a pretty cool type of thing where we took this little sphere and we started to create, a little bit of like a height to it and things like that. That's also where we can enable the height. We can do some parallax scaling on this. We can displace the vertices. We can do some parallax exclusion. So we're just going to leave it there for a second. And we're going to start to mess with that. So the thing in the phong too is we have all these different things that we can adjust, and just, as you see in the example, I started changing some colors, so we can start dialing in some colors here, and we can pick like what we think we might want, and start to go from there and start to kind of dial in some colors, and then we're kind of like push this out slightly. And in our bump, we have all these settings. Okay, so we're right there. And some of the other things you can look through here is we can also add like a rim light, which is on the top. So that's going to kind of like give some depth to the sphere. And you can also change these colors. We could bring in some slightly different things, but we'll just leave that off for now. And the one thing I wanted to do in my sphere is, if you go into the detail, we're sitting at 20 rows by 40 columns. So in here, if I double click on this, or just click once, and in this space I hit wire, I can see what it's looking like. So what the wireframe of this is. And I'm just going to increase this to like 200 by 200. So it gives a little bit, but it's adding some more polygons. And these are square polygons, but it's adding some more, dimension to this and different types of things, right? So as we go through into our phong, and this is where we want to, again, we have this ability within our noise now to kind of change some of this stuff and kind of stretch this out and use some different things within here to also alter everything that's going on, right? So to give our colors. Within this, we can also turn monochrome on and give some more colors, and we'll leave that off for a second as we kind of displace some of this. And so that's another thing. What I want to do is in this null right here, we could just duplicate this, but I'm going to take this null and push this to the height map. And then in our height map, we can then start to even, bump some other things with that because we're referencing a noise. And so it's also giving that, right? So here's the magic button. Now that we put the null and the height map in here, when we displace the vertices, we are giving this type of like flower effect that was going on. And that was the idea, right? And how we started out. So this is the things that you have to play with of, now this has displaced it, it's made it bigger, so things have grown. So this is sometimes where we have to adjust the size of the sphere or the size of the rectangles or different things like that. Also, the power with this is too, in any of these, the spheres, and that's why we have the transform in here, we can then add some ABS time dot seconds and have this like slightly rotate. I'm going to do this divided by 2 so it's not going too crazy. But now we're like moving this around in space, right? And in here, if we go back to our noise and we hit monochrome off now, you can see where it gives it this like vibrant type of color, right? Because we're bringing our G and Bs into space. It's not just black and white. So again, this is the power of like dialing in, what you think and what you're trying to look for. So to not take too long with this, we're going to leave this for now. And we're going to start to kind of substance top and put some different things in our background, as you saw in the example. So what we're going to do now is we are going to add a PBR, which stands for physical base render. And within this is going to start to give some texture and things to our wall. Right now, we're just kind of spilling that off on a constant. But I'm going to add some cool things. And for the first one, I'm going to add what's called a substance. And I will put a link in the bio, but there are some different substances that Adobe has and some different things like that. But we're just going to use the standard TouchDesigner ones at the moment. And just reorganizing slightly here because I'm going to add a number of these or a couple of these. And then in this PBR, I'm going to drag or look over into my map and I see this substance top, right? So I'm going to take this substance and put it over here. And there's another thing that we can do in this is we can do a substance select. And let me look for it real quick up. Substance select, it's right there. I'm going to add this in and I'm going to drag this over here. And this kind of gives us the ability to create a different type of substance based on some of the substances we are going to select. So as you saw in the example, I was showing a wood background. So we're going to go with that again, and we're going to go and put some wood. And in our substance select now, you can see that it still has these different types of things. If it was a cement or something else like that, it could also have a height map. So there's nothing really that we need to do with this, but this is just giving us kind of that option as we go down the road. The other thing too is because we're going to bring in physical base materials and physical base render materials, we need to add an environment light. So we're going to go up here, we're going to add an environment light. And you can see it has a yellow yield sign because it's going to be looking for something. And I'm going to add a movie file in, and then I'm going to put a null on the end of this. I'm going to drag this on there. This would be a real poor light to have the banana, but we are going to keep that for now. And in this, I am going to look in my folder, and I happen to download this environment map, and I organized it within my create project portfolio. And I'm going to look at this clear as night. I'm going to drop that in there, and now we have our environment light. It's going to take a second because I happen to download an 8K one. Don't need to get it that big, but it's just giving, some different things, right? So now if we take this PBR and we put it on one of our sidewalls, so I'm going to drag it over there, I'm going to put the material on there. You can see now that we have our wood grain wall on our material, right? I'm going to put this on the other sidewall. Oh, what did I do there? Oh, drag the wrong one. So I'm going to put this on the other sidewall. And now we have wood on both sides. The environment light is based, like if you think about the sun, think about, it's an environment. So there is going to be different types of shadows like that. And so now we have kind of our wood grain, and we can adjust the environment light up here. If we go into our render, our extensions, where is it? The common, the light. Oh, here, the environment map rotate. So you can move the map around based on those things. And one other thing to notice is just so you want to see in all these PBR settings, and there's so many different settings in here, it could take forever to talk about. But if you brought the roughness down, this is also some of the things that we're going to be adjusting, right? Where our ambient inclusion is, how it looks, what we're looking for, those types of things, right? So as you noticed up here, I made this data. And I made these two different forms right here because it looks a little, small. Because if you go into the substance, in our common, we're sitting at 256 by 256. So this is the power of this. We're going to go here. We're going to view this so we can bring in our substance resolutions. And we're going to drag this over here. And now we're giving more detail to it because we are resing it up, right? So now we're looking more like wood. And the power of this constant top is I can start to, because this is going to be multiples of 2, we have to start thinking in that way. So 256, 512, 1024, and we can go to 2048, right? So we're giving even more depth to it. We do 2048 on this, right? So we're giving more and more detail. But you can see, let's say if I put 2000 in this, it's going to yield sawing this substance, which saying it's not. And if I hit this, it's going to say resolution must be a power of 2, which it's not, because this is not the power of 2 for that, right? So we're going to go again to 2048. And we're going to leave that because we don't want any yield signs. So now we have these types of things. We have our flower moving in space. And I'm going to then add this little for that I had in the example. So I'm going to take this whole network right here. And I'm just going to copy and paste it. So I have 2 of them. And I have to make sure that this is not going in here, but it's gonna, this 4 is gonna go in here. So I'm gonna drag this PBR on there. And now we have our wood floor, right? But I don't want to use the wood floor. I want to bring in something else that I found in a substance top online, right? So again, there's going to be some links for these different tops, but we can go back into here and I can say, I'm going to look for this. I'm going to go into my folder over here where I happen to have it. And I'm going to use this floor tiles. So I'm going to open that up. It's going to take a second to load. Or it didn't. Oh, now it did. Yep, perfect. Okay, so now we have our floor tiles, and this is again where we can play with this. We can play with, you know, how our floor is, the size of our floor, you know, what details we want. But the cool thing about this is now you can do the same scenario here within our substance select, and I can select for this height. So because I copy and pasted these, I have both sets of things. So I'm going to go into my PBR here. And I'm going to go into my map and I'm going to drag this sub 2 into our, well, first I got to enable the height maps. Can't drag it in before I enable it. So I'm going to enable it in. I'm going to put my height map right here. And then I can also like do some different things like that and do some different bumps, do some different occlusions again. So how things are moving back, displace the vertices. You know, this is going to slightly move the thing up and down. But it's just giving some more options here. And as you saw in the example, when I started off, I kind of had it slightly moving, right? So these are kind of some of the cool things is we have this, but just to create a little bit more like real life or some movement to it, we can add some different things. So I'm going to add an LFO. And just to do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to add a math. I'm going to add a rename. Right, and I'm going to add a null, and I'm going to do this rename, and I'm going to say bump, because that's what I want it called, and then I can drag this into my PBR and use this value within this LFO and start to do the bump, right? So it's kind of given this little dimension to this floor. It's just slightly moving it, and that's the power again of the math is I can go in here. I can change these values and give it a little bit more bump, you know, so it's doing something crazy. I can take this LFO because it's moving too fast and dial this back, you know, so it's going to be slightly over time that it's changing. And again, we're not going to get over, it's going to take a long time to dial in and how we want it to make it more realistic, but just know you have these different options and different types of things to do. So we're kind of walking through this quickly. The other thing too is I'm going to create this same network of my LFO network here. I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to take this rename and I'm going to rename this to noise. And within my noise up here, or in my phong up here, where I'm defaulting this or taking this from my different maps and my color maps and my displacement scale and all the different things that are growing is I'm going to take this so we can have like this growth to it, right? And so within this noise, I'm just going to put this on displacement scale. And you can see it's getting a little wacky. So this is the power again of the math, is we can go down here and we can say, oh, we don't want it to go to 5. Let's say we want it to go to 0.8. And we want it to go between 0.8 and let's say 0.6. So it's going to just have some slight movement. And maybe that's even too much movement. But the other thing too is it's pretty big. So this is again of just like dialing down the size and how do we want to have it sit in the space. So the power of this camera that I added to see in spaces, if we look in here, we can see like where this is sitting, right? So it's sitting kind of out on the axis. So it's pushed out a little bit. So we can go into our sphere within our geo right here, and we can take this z-axis, and then we can start to kind of push it back in the room. So instead of like constantly changing where everything is, we can just know that we're going to have it sit like right there. So you can't see it like overly well because I could crank up this light right here actually. If I turn this up to like 10, it might light up the room, but it didn't light up the geo or there. Should have known that. So poor example, but you can see where it's in space. So now it's sitting kind of out in front, right? And then we can go back in here and we can say sphere is too big, right? Still too large. So what do we need to do? And that's the power of this transform in here, is we can take this and dial back the scale, right? And so this is something, now we have like a different look, and it's kind of also changing like how it's pushing out in space and what you want to do with that, right? So the other thing too is I kind of have this running a little bit too hot. So I'm going to go back into this math and I'm going to say like, I don't want it to go that much. So I'm going to say this to like 0.7 to 0.75. So it just has like slight movement on it. And it just has like a little bit of growth, not going too big. And you could, and again here, you could change this from a sine to a Gaussian, you know, so it's just going up and down. It's just doing some things. Like this is all dependent on like what you want to do and what you think looks good for you. So I'm going to, again, in here, I'm just going to dial this sphere back. So I'm changing some of the different, you know, sphere dimensions in that. And so it's also just creating all these different looks, right? So this is kind of where we kind of started and what the idea was, you know, so I'm achieved the idea that we started in the tutorial real quick. And this is again where you can start to play with things in space. You can start to play with your PBRs and look for some different things within like the wood. Do I want to have some, you know, different dimension to that? Do I want to take down the specular? Do you know, I want to have some different like roughness to it, you know, bring down a slight on the light so it's not as bright. And then also the same type of thing, if we wanted to add, you know, a slight like feedback network, we could do that just to have some other like dimension in the space, right? So we can do the same thing where we bring in a feedback, we bring in a level. We're going to add a cross to this. So we have our kind of wet dry. We're going to bring this over here. We're going to drag this on top of the feedback. And we're going to change our level in our post down to, again, let's say 0.8. And we, in our cross now, we can bring back, you know, some other dimensions. So it's not really doing too much. And there's some other things we could do with some different renders and some render tops and things like that to change that. But that's kind of where it is. And this is where it stands. And you can see now we have space up here. And so if you want to put a ceiling on this space, if you want to do something else, if you want to, again, transform these dimensions and take your, you know, your x-axis and raise this up, you know, so we're covering it. But the one thing that we really could do back in our rectangle is, again, we could just change the, you know, the size of this. So we can go from this to like 1.5, right? And so now we're kind of covering up that space. And within that, also, where our center values are and different types of things, this is the point where we can start to push this. So this is covering it. So now we're kind of clearing that out. So this will do it for this tutorial. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will call that a wrap.